The oldest and strongest emotion of mankind is fear. And the oldest and strongest kind of fear is fear of the unknown. We tell ourselves that we live on a placid island of ignorance in the midst of black seas of infinity, and it was never meant that we should voyage far. We believe the laws of nature are our safeguard, a fortress of rationality against the assaults of chaos. But what happens when that fortress crumbles? What happens when a force enters our world that we cannot name, cannot measure, and cannot even truly see? We aren't talking about ghosts or vampires, things with human faces and human motives. We're talking about something entirely elsewhere. Tonight, we step into the blasted heath of H.P. Lovecraft's personal favorite work. A story that isn't just a tale of a falling meteor, but a clinical documentation of the breakdown of the human psyche. This is The Color Out of Space. West of Arkham, the hills rise wild. There are valleys with deep woods that no axe has ever cut. In these dark, narrow glens, the trees slope fantastically and brooklets trickle without ever catching a glint of sunlight. Our narrator is a surveyor, a man of maps and measurements. He has come to this remote valley to plan a new reservoir for the city of Arkham. But he finds a spot where the map fails. A 5-acre patch where nothing grows but a fine grey dust of ash. The locals call it the blasted heath. They shun it. They speak of strange days that happened 40 years ago. The narrator meets old Amy Pierce, an allegedly crazy man who is the only survivor of those days. Though, through Emmy, we uncover the history of the Gardner family, who once lived a pleasant farmstead life right where the great desolation now sits. It all began with a meteorite. In June of 1882, a white-hot rock fell from the sky and buried itself beside Nathan Gardner's well. It was reported in all of the papers, drawing 3 professors from Miskatonic University. They were men of science, armed with spectroscopes and chemical agents and shit. But the rock defied them. It refused to cool down. It began to shrink, actually, visibly losing its mass day by day without losing its structural integrity. When the professors gouged out a specimen, they found a globule embedded inside. It was a color they couldn't describe. It displayed bands unlike anything in a normal spectrum. They called it a color only by analogy. The scientists' tools failed. The specimen in the beaker simply vanished overnight, leaving only a charred spot. When lightning struck the meteorite 6 times, the entire mass disappeared into the earth. The professors, unable to categorize the phenomenon, simply labeled it as odd and retreated to their ivory towers, leaving the gardeners alone with the unknown. The next season, a species lusciousness took over the farm. The fruit grew to phenomenal size, glowing with an unwanted glow. Named Gardner thought he was blessed, obviously. But when he tasted the fruit, he found it ash-like and bitter, totally unfit to eat. Then the grey and brittle death began. The vegetation turned a sickly ashen hue. The trees began to sway and claw at the air, even when there was no wind. The cows produced undrinkable milk and their bodies began to shrivel and compress in atrocious disintegrations. But the siphoning wasn't limited to the livestock. Nahum's wife, Nabi, was the first to succumb. She spoke of things in the air she couldn't name. She ceased to recognize her own sons and eventually lost the power of speech altogether, regressing to crawling on all fours like a beast. Nahum had no choice but to lock her in the attic. Soon the madness took his son, Thaddeus. He had seen moving colors in the well. He too was moved to the attic, screaming behind a locked door. Then he died, turning into the same grey, crumbling substance as the vegetation. Little Mervyn vanished next, disappearing while fetching water from the well. Emmy Pears visited the farm 2 weeks later to find a house of silence and deadly cold. He found Nahum sitting in the kitchen, a distorted parody of a human face scaling off in dry fragments. Emmy ascended to the attic. He found what was left of Nabi Gardner. It is implied that he killed her in an act of mercy. As he descended, Nahum, in a final moment of lucidity, cracked out his last words. It burns, cold and wet, sucks the life out. It comes from some place where things ain't as they is here. Nahum died, his body caving in like a hollow shell. That night, Amy and a group of men witnessed the end, the start of a shaft of unknown phosphorus shot up from the well. The entire farm began to glow with a nameless radiance. The trees lashed out in a mad cosmic frenzy. The color poured out of the well and shot into the sky like a rocket, returning to the stars. But Emmy Pears looked back. He saw a small piece of that shapeless horror feebly rise and then sink back down into the well. It's still there. The grey area creeps an inch a year, and the city of Arkham is about to flood the valley and drink water from that same well. Why is this story Lovecraft's favorite? Well, because it successfully presents a horror that is literally incomprehensible. Most monsters are just people or animals in scary masks, tentacles, slime, antenna, basically cranked up versions of our own world. But the color has no face. It has no motive we can understand. It is just a color. This is the shift into true cosmic horror. It is revelation that our reality is just a thin surface. Beneath it lie black, extra cosmic gulfs that stun the brain. In Lovecraft's world, there's no good versus evil. There's only the vast, the mechanical, and the utterly indifferent universe. We are not the protagonists of this universe. We are merely ants on a vast stage, and the color is a foot that steps on us without ever realizing we exist. Psychology tells us that our nervous system are designed to seek certainty. We categorize the world to survive. When we face a current, identifiable threat, like a predator, we feel fear. But when we face a potential, unknown threat, we feel anxiety. In clinical terms, this is intolerance of uncertainty. People with high levels of this trait interpret ambiguity as inherently threatening. This is the psychological lever Lovecraft pulls in The Color Out of Space. When a scientist can't place the meteorite, it creates an epistemological gap that tools of reason fail to map the unknown. This is what psychology calls a cognitive rupture. The brain's threat estimation system, the amygdala, goes into overdrive. Nahum Gardner didn't just go mad. He suffered a complete disintegration of the rational self. His last words are strongly incoherent because he has lost ownership of himself. He uses the third person to refer to his own death because the I has been literally broken apart. This is the horror of objection. It's the breakdown of the boundary between the self and the other. When the gardeners turn grey and brittle, this division between human, animal, and plant washes away. They aren't just dying, they are losing their identity as human beings. We fear the color not because it wants to hurt us, but because its presence proves that we are vulnerable to invaders from beyond the known universe. It highlights our inductive frailty, the terrifying possibility that the regularities of nature we rely on every single day might just swerve. In traditional literature, we talk about the sublime. Think of standing before a massive mountain range. At first it overwhelms you, but eventually it reaffirms the greatness of human reason or the greatness of God. Lovecraft gives us the anti-humanist sublime. His sublime does not affirm us, it nullifies us. It is an encounter with the vast or the powerful that leaves us in perpetual arrest. It suggests that human history is a momentary spark of no importance, that we are miserable denizens of a wretched little fly speck on the back door of a microscopic universe. This is cosmicism. It is the antithesis of the idea that there's an objective meaning to our existence. It is a declaration that the universe does not care if we achieve our goals. Lovecraft used the color to explore the world without us, a reality that exists whether we think of it or not, and which obeys laws entirely indifferent to our persistence. This reflects our modern Anthropocene anxieties. We live in a time where we realize that nature, long seen as a passive background, is actually an acting subject, and we are the passive objects being altered by forces beyond our control. The color is a hyper-object, something so massively distributed in time and space that we can't fully grasp it, even as it's poisoning our wells. So why does The Color Out of Space haunt me so much? Well, perhaps it's because it feels less like fiction and more like a transcript of an isolated mood. It taps into the agrarian anxiety of losing our land to progress, just as the Swift River Valley was erased by a real reservoir. It mirrors our fear of invisible poisons like radiation, a stalking monster that we can't see until our hair falls out or our bones grow brittle. But mostly, it haunts me because it refuses to offer comfort. The story ends, but the color does not leave. A small remnant sinks back into the well. We like to think that we are the masters of our domain. We like to think that to name a thing is to reveal it, and to reveal it is to control it. But Lovecraft reminds us that naming is just an analogy. The universe is vast and cold and ancient, and one day the stars will be red again. Until then, we are just waiting in the grey.